Okay, in my last video I mentioned that my bike had been running somewhat hot and it was a cause of concern. As I had mentioned, in about 80 to 90 degree weather at all times, I had noticed the thermometer getting up into what I call the 3/4 mark, which is roughly, about 1/4 of an inch from the red line, which I felt was way too hot for this bike. Typically the temperature is supposed to ride right in the middle, and I know it was kind of a hot day, but even since that video I took it out a few extra times, and especially on days when it was below 80, so 75 degree days and nights, it still was running really hot. So now I've got a concern. So I did a little homework. One of the first suggestions was to bleed and burp the cooling system. I've done that. I can confirm I don't have any bubbles. The next thing to do is either to check the thermostat, or potentially I could have a bad voltage regulator for the temperature gauge. So what happens here is that this temperature gauge runs on a small 7-volt circuit with a little tiny voltage regulator that drops the bike's voltage from 12 to 7 volts just to run this little gauge. And what happens is, over time, that regulator starts to flake out and it doesn't bring the voltage down to 7 volts like it should, and as a result the voltage is too high and then the gauge misrepresents the temperature on the bike. I certainly hope that's a problem, because that's the easiest one. And what I've done is I picked up this new voltage regulator from eBay, from a recommended source, that replaces the stock piece, and it's just basically a plug and play piece that I'll tuck somewhere behind the headlight. I gotta say, it's huge. The stock regulator is probably 1/4 the size, so we'll see about that. But I'll get this plugged in. Hopefully that solves the problem. Do a couple test rides. What I've also done is picked up one of these laser guided temperature guns to get an idea of some areas in the bike, especially the motor, to get an idea of the type of temperatures I'm seeing from the bike, from the motor, from the heads, and from the radiator, to confirm if the bike actually is running hot or if it is a temperature sensor issue. So the first thing I'm going to do, because it's pretty straightforward, is just go ahead and replace this sensor. So the first thing I'm going to do is start by replacing this regulator and see if that causes any difference. Go for a test drive. If not, I'm going to move on to testing with this heat gun to see if the engine is indeed overheating. And if that's the case, then I'm going to have to look to other options. I suspect that it could be the thermostat, but it seems like it's not likely, considering the mileage of the bike, and that this is fairly a recent problem. But if it is, I'll go ahead and get down there and replace it. I don't think that it's the radiator, because the radiator is in really good shape. It doesn't leak, and I've taken a look at it and there's no calcium buildup whatsoever, and it does have a pretty good flow to it. So, and I didn't mention that I did flush out the radiator just for good measure before putting it back on the engine, and there was no residue, no buildup in it at all. So I think the radiator is probably fine. So anyway, first things first, going to take the electronics out here, replace this regulator, go for a quick ride, and see if that helps. And if that does help, great, that's the end of the video. If not, I'm going to move on to doing some additional testing to rule out the thermostat and take it from there. So, should be a good one. Oh, and thanks again for some of your feedback on some things to look at. I definitely appreciate that you guys are giving things a second look, and your comments have been helpful. So, appreciate it, and time to get started. Let's do this. So I think earlier I called this a heat gun. What it actually is a temperature thermometer. It's laser guided, so, which sounds super space age, but it really isn't. You can pick these up at your local AutoZone or Napa. This one I grabbed on Amazon because you guys know how much I love Amazon for like 15 bucks. So putting that Prime account to work. But basically what it does is it shoots a little laser on a surface and then tells you its temperature. So right there, looks like my head. This bike is completely cold. Head's at about 84 degrees. Okay, so where this voltage regulator should live is right back here behind the gauges. And I've managed to already get mine loose. The bonus is, since I've done some rewiring, is that the wiring is right here. So I'm just going to pop this wiring off, plug in this regulator, and loosely mount it somewhere here on the handlebar just to test it out. Take it for a quick spin. So for those who might be wondering, there's the factory regulator, which lives behind this speedometer gauge, and this is the replacement aftermarket regulator. So you can see the difference in size here. It's going to be tricky hiding this thing, but hopefully it does the job. The voltage regulator is wired up temporarily. Got it just zip tied here until I can tear down into the front of the bike, but it's wired up. Let's fire this thing up and see if it's going to work for me. So after returning from about a 25-minute ride, I noticed temperatures again creeping up into the 3/4 range. So while I believe the regulator is working, I do not think that it solved my problem. So my next area of suspicion, as I'd mentioned, is the thermostat. There, yes, that's the regulator and it's working. Getting a closer look at the temperatures on the radiator with my laser guided temperature sensor. Looking at temperatures right around 210 and 215 there at the top. Probably a little bit hotter than it should be. So potentially I'm thinking that maybe the thermostat could be just tired and not opening up all the way, and as a result restricting flow to the radiator, causing the bike to slowly creep up and overheat. So according to this Honda Haynes manual, it looks like the thermostat should be fully open at right around 207 degrees Fahrenheit. So, I would assume that seeing temperatures at around 216 leads me to little suspicion. Now, also according to this manual, I think it's about 260 degrees Fahrenheit are the point at which the bike is fully overheating. So I wouldn't say that I'm in the danger zone, but I am suspicious that perhaps the thermostat is the next place to look. It's not an expensive part, so replacing it would at least give me a little peace of mind. Not to mention it's probably the original one, so I'd imagine it's, 35 years old. So thanks again for watching, and your feedback on this issue is appreciated. And of course, I'll see you next time.